What I saw yesterday in that Orange Bowl is probably the most embarrassing performance of any college football team that I've ever seen in my 35 years or so of watching college football. Florida State, the players that quit, the coaches that failed to prepare what team was left, the administration, the school for the way they acted the 30 days leading up to this game, they should be embarrassed and ashamed. Um, of the product they put on the field yesterday. And it's going to have consequences and repercussions. And the Florida State fans will cry, and they'll make excuses, and they'll continue to do those things. But perception is reality. And the Florida State fans, the Florida State players that quit, the administration that's handing out lawsuits like Tic Tacs, they can pretend that they did the right thing. They can act honorable. They can bury their head in the sand and, take this result, a 63-3 just massacre, and pretend that it doesn't matter. But to the 10th and 11th graders watching this game, it matters. The recruits, the high school kids that will be in college in 2 to 3 years, to future playoff committees that are having to decide at some point down the road between a 10-2 Florida State as an 11 or 12 seed and a 10-2, let's say, Ole Miss, who did not play in a playoff game but went out and absolutely embarrassed Penn State yesterday, or a 10-2 Missouri, who went out and beat Ohio State, or whatever other team from every other conference. It's not an SEC thing. You've all heard the expression that perception is reality, or perception becomes reality. And the entire month of December, literally everything, the things that were said by Florida State, the things that were done by Florida State, the attitude within the program, the players that quit, the coaches, like I mentioned, who failed to prepare the players that did play. They should be embarrassed and ashamed. Georgia is better than Florida State. There's no question. Georgia was better than Florida State in week 1. Georgia was better than Florida State in week 5, week 6, week 10, week 12, conference championship weekend, and they were better yesterday. They're not 60 points better. You can't pretend that the players that Florida State were missing just don't matter, and that if all of those players would have played, the outcome would have been exactly the same. You just can't pretend that. That's just ridiculous. As Georgia fans, we had some players that sat this game out for injury reasons. Brock Bowers, Amarius Mims, Smile Munden, Ra Thomas. Those are all 4 starters off the top of my head. Pop Dumas Johnson, that's 5 starters off the top of my head. Do we think that if those players would have played, Georgia is better? Of course. Of course. So we can't pretend that the players that, chose to quit for Florida State didn't have an impact on that game. But in no world would it have been a 60-point impact. Georgia was winning this game. It didn't matter who played or didn't play for Florida State. And Florida State knew that. Their coaches knew that. Their administration knew that. And the players knew that. And that's the primary reason the number of players for Florida State that sat out this game chose to sit out this game. Because now they can pretend in whatever fairy tale world they live in that their 13-1 season is really a 15-0 national championship season. And they can pretend the Orange Bowl doesn't count, doesn't matter, just a scrimmage. Danny Cannell crying crocodile tears all over Twitter and TikTok and anywhere else where he can post his little fucking crybaby video. Y'all can pretend it didn't matter. It mattered to the players that played. It mattered to Georgia, and it mattered to the Florida State players that had the fucking nuts to suit up and play in this game. And to those players, Uncle Lou salutes you, because you were fighting with one arm tied behind your back. And that's not Georgia's fault. That's not ESPN's fault. That's not the playoff committee's fault. That's Florida State's fault. It's a culture issue. The culture at Florida State is in the fucking garbage. You don't have that number of players quit. Let me ask you something. Whatever fan you're a team of, okay? And look, when it comes to players opting out of bowl games, I know that there are fans on all sides of that fence. There are some fans, myself included, who don't think a player should ever voluntarily opt out of playing a football game. Ever. I feel like football players should play football. But there are plenty of other fans who feel like, you know what? They've done what they've done. They're a first or second round grade. Why risk it? Let them sit out and prepare for the draft. I disagree with that. But I understand the thought process behind it. I also understand that I'm not the one risking that, okay? So it's easy for me to make that decision for some other 21-year-old who's got millions and millions on the line should they get hurt in these bowl games. I get that. But is there any fan watching who thinks a player that is not even going to get drafted, players that are never going to suit up in the NFL, is there anybody watching that is okay with those players quitting? What in the world, you know, and here's the other thing. The Florida State fans will run around like, well, we had 25 players that didn't suit up. No, we had 25 opt-outs. You didn't have 25 opt-outs. You didn't have 25 opt-outs. Transfers are not opt-outs. Okay? Opt-outs are players who are on Florida State's team, eligible to play in the game, but choose not to. They just quit. They say, we're not going to play. Not transfer. Georgia's got 16, 17 people in the transfer portal. Those aren't opt-out. Georgia had 25 players that didn't play in this game. Now, Florida State wants to pretend that everybody that didn't play in the bowl game is called an opt-out. What in Georgia had 25 opt-outs. So what? You had 28, 29, 63-3. 63-3, 42-0 at halftime. The most lopsided first half in Orange Bowl history. The backups, walk-ons, third stringers beat you 21-0. 21-0. Jackson Muschamp is only on the... Jackson Muschamp's a walk-on. Jackson Muschamp wouldn't start at an FCS school. He only wears a Georgia helmet because his dad coaches there. He's a walk-on. He was playing in this game at quarterback. Gunnar Stockton is Georgia's third-string quarterback. You hear from Florida State, we're down to our third-string quarterback. Georgia played their third-string quarterback the entire second half. Beat you 21-0. They beat you 21-0. They had almost 700 yards of offense. Georgia did. It's not Georgia's job to go out there and roll over. If a team shows up to play a game, the other team's going to play. And it's your job to stop it. And you couldn't do it. Whatever starters you had couldn't stop Georgia in the first and second quarter. And you couldn't stop Georgia's backups, third stringers, and walk-ons in the third quarter or fourth quarter. It was 63-0, and it could have been a lot worse. Or 63-3. And it could have been a lot worse. And this is going to have consequences. And like I said in the beginning of the video, and that's the main point I want to try to get across here. This is going to reverberate. This isn't, well, now the Orange Bowl is over, everybody will forget about this and move on. No, it's not going to happen. There's a reason KJ Bolden is not playing for Florida State. And there's going to be more KJ Boldens down the road. This is one of the most embarrassing things I have ever seen a university do to itself. And yes, Florida State did this to itself. In every single year that we have had a college football playoff, there is a team or multiple teams that feel like they got shafted. Every year. It's happened to Georgia multiple times. It happened to Georgia this year. Georgia feels like they should be in the playoff. Georgia thinks they're one of the best four teams. They didn't quit. They didn't roll over. They didn't spend the month of December curled up in a corner in a fetal position, crying like a 2-year-old whose mommy's titty is out of milk. Florida State did. Half Georgia's team didn't quit and throw in the towel and tell the underclassmen to go fuck themselves. That's what you did. All these players who quit on Florida State told all those freshmen, sophomores, and junior backups, fuck you. You're on your own. We don't give a fuck about you. You bring in these Keon Coleman. Do you think Keon Coleman gives one single fuck about Florida State? No. No. Transfers don't give a fuck. You know, the nucleus of your team, the bread and butter of Florida State's team came through the transfer portal. They don't give a fuck about Florida State. All those quitters, they're gone. Florida State is what's left to pick up the pieces. And it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. The fact that you thought you should have been in the playoffs, but you weren't, so we're just going to roll over and die, is the most humiliating thing I have seen in the history of college football. Period. Period. Georgia thought they should have been in, so what approach did Georgia take? Let's go out and prove everybody wrong. And they did. They went out and they beat the absolute life out of you. The most embarrassing beatdown in bowl game history. We've been playing bowl games in this country after college football seasons for over 100 years. 60 points is the largest margin of victory in bowl game history. So congratulations, Florida State. You're the worst bowl-eligible team in the history of college football. That's what you put on the field yesterday. You should be embarrassed and ashamed. Alabama last year felt like they were one of the best 4 teams. I didn't think they deserved to be in the playoffs. That's not the point. They thought they did. And what did they do in their New Year's Six game? They went out and they beat the life out of the Big 12 champions, Kansas State. You had an opportunity to do that, and you didn't. You could have taken the month of December to rally the troops. This is a failure of leadership from the top down. The presidents, the administration, the athletic director and the athletic department, the head coach, the coaches up underneath that, the senior and junior leaders on that Florida State team. This is a failure of leadership of monumental proportions, and it is going to have consequences and repercussions years down the road for Florida State. High school kids that want to play college football were watching that game. Future college football playoff selection committee members were watching that game, and they're going to remember it. Subconsciously, maybe. This will be used in recruiting against you. Negative recruiting is real, and this will be used against you. Florida State should be embarrassed and ashamed. Embarrassed and ashamed. Do better.